Good evening, everybody. The school committee seeks to convene into open session and recess to executive session for discussion and or action regarding these items of business exempt from open meeting under Rhode Island General Law 4246-4 and A, discussion, Nicole Solis versus South Kingston School District, CA number PC 24000376. Rhode Island General Law 4246-5A2. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to convene in executive session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That motion passed. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Mr. Bradley Share.
Here.
Mr. James Vestiva,
Here.
Ms. Calvetta,
Here.
Miss Melissa Boyd,
Here.
Miss Kate Massonesi.
Here.
Miss Michelle Busso,
Yeah.
and myself, Paul Whitford, present. Please join us in the pledge of allegiance to the flag. Do we have a motion to spare the minutes in executive session?
Make a motion to seal the minutes of executive session. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
There was no votes taken in the executive session. Next on the agenda is community comments.
Hey, Paula, can I make a motion to move the community comments to after the superintendent's report in case members of the public show up? Second that.
All in favor of that?
Aye.
That motion passes. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to remove items A and B from the consent agenda. B, A and B.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that motion passes.
I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That motion passes.
And make another motion to table the items A and B that were removed from the consent agenda until our next meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That motion passes. Next item on the agenda is the superintendent's report. I'll pass that over to Mr. Gaza.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the school committee, members of the public. I would ask that the present superintendent's report presentation please be presented. Thanks. Next slide, please. In my report this week, we have 4 items, 2 of which are standing items. That of personnel and enrollment. We also have I have an update to give on the equity audit. And then as we've been doing for the past couple of weeks now and months, we do have a teaching and learning item in order to get us prepped and ready for state testing results to come on out and school accountabilities. But one of those things, the best way to eat an elephant one bite at a time. So rather than cram everything into one meeting, we thought we would break that up. So next slide, please. You'll see in this personnel report that we have a 1 leave of absence that has already concluded. We do have 1 resignation. However, that has also been posted already and we have an active applicant pool that is ongoing. And again, students are in front of a certified individual. We also welcome 3 new members to South Kingstown Public Schools: Erin Hayes, Madison Smith, and Cynthia Delaglio. We welcome them. And we also have 1 resignation in terms of a coach, Joseph Hetty. Our head swim coach has resigned as he is, I believe, onto a different state to seek new opportunities. And so our best wishes go out to him. Next slide, please. We actually have the least amount of movement ever in our, or at least ever in terms of my brief tenure here, in tonight's enrollment tracker. We actually stayed the same in terms of total enrollment. We did, however, have West Kingston exit the district, but we did gain 1 student here at Broad Rock Middle School. Because of the small nature or number associated with this, this is the extent of the update that I'm going to give so that where that student exited to could not be tracked by comparing it to previous reports. So I will, should there be larger influx or exodus from the district, we'll add on to where students are going, whether that be out of state, in state, private, or other in future updates. Next slide, please. So in the last update, I believe every member of the school committee has either has either interviewed with Westwind or has been extended or should have been extended the opportunity to interview over Zoom. So we have a tentative timeline that's going on in order to set this up. I have standing meetings with Mandy Bosarth, who many of you met. Currently, we're going to be meeting every week to make sure that we are getting these action items and goalposts and that we're hitting these milestones, as well as pivot and make any adjustments that we need to. We are in the launch process right now where interview of key leaders is begun. We are starting to identify priorities and domains for the survey and audit domains. We are still waiting on determining data sharing agreement and finalizing that. We did in our most recent meeting, Rhode Island makes a tremendous amount of our achievement as well as discipline data public, as well as whether that be RICAS, SATs, but also in terms of school culture, climate, through survey work. So we have a tremendous amount of information that is readily available. And so we're really taking a look at, okay, well, what else might we have that could that would benefit, or rather than be redundant, or would help support other pieces of data. And so we do not have a data sharing agreement yet. And outside of that, and I would like to assure the community that only public information that is readily available to everyone here and out in the community is the only data that has been shared to date. And we are in the process of what data sources would be useful and what, if any, they don't already have enough access to. In terms of November and December, really the survey, because of SurveyWorks and the type of questions that are asked there, the survey is not, we don't want to be redundant. And so once again, it's much like the data points. What questions in a survey do we want to ask? And are those questions that either need to support existing data or is because of the absence of existing data? So that's going to take some time for them to formulate. And then once they do get access to any data or we've agreed upon which aspects they would like to focus on and or need more, they will take part in analyzing that, and that will be ongoing. Next slide, please. As we move to January, it's here that we begin, or that they would begin the focus groups. Prior to this meeting, I have discussed with them the importance of community education, if you will, of what constitutes or how they go about making focus groups so that they are indeed representative of the community and or groups and demographics that they are looking to hear from. As such, they have agreed to present virtually to the school committee and to the general public to make sure that they that they understand both the statistical and procedural components that go into making a focus group, as well as any data that is gathered through those conversations. Once the focus groups have occurred, they will again go about what we are paying them to do, and that's analyzing our programs, analyzing the data that they see, and seeing in terms of any correlation or causation that they might have. And then with a final report occurring in February or March. I will be providing or updates as needed. Again, this is strictly a tentative timeline at this time. And should, or as these points come into focus and we get those either data points, I will make those well known to the community at large as well as this body. Any questions about anything that I've covered so far? Okay, seeing lots of Bruins fans, I will move on to the teaching and learning aspect. Agenda item, next slide, please. So October, or depending on the election year, potentially November, is RICAS release state testing data season, as well as accountability. I had heard through the rumor mill that, in terms of when is RICAS coming out, I had heard everything from the end of this month to tomorrow. In the most recent Commissioner's Field memo to administrators, there was no mention whatsoever of the release of data. So I do not have a timeline. However, historically speaking, it does occur in October and sometimes into November, and often the school accountabilities follow. So again, trying to make sure that teaching and learning and its implications and outcomes are on focus of the school committee, keeping in line with that, as well as not wanting to shove everything into one piece. We're bringing this forward. So we'd like you to know just about how Mr. Seeger and I and our teams will go about taking a look, or how we've historically taken a look at our RICAS data and SAT, PSAT data. As you go through this, or as you listen to Mr. Seeger's presentation, I would like the community and the committee to keep in mind two things that often get lost in the mix. And the first is that with RICAS, the first thing that most people don't know about RICAS is that their expectations are extremely high. The expectations that when the committee went through and redid and reconstituted RICAS, essentially those experts made it so that meeting expectation or exceeding expectation, that they would expect 50% of students to not achieve that standard. As such, partially meeting does not necessarily mean failing. It means approaching. It means it was actually, when we hit 50%, that was what the test was designed to do. And with RICAS, with Massachusetts having at least 10-year, if not 20-year advantage over Rhode Island, seeing those comparisons to Massachusetts, as well as the interpretation of those results, I would just like to make sure that people know, again, how the test is constructed, and again, what some of those labels that seems so easy to go about and put on to schools and or student achievement are not necessarily so easy to make. And again, RICAS, and in this case, MCAS as well, is an extremely rigorous test with very, very high standards of what it means to meet expectations. And then the last one that often gets thrown around when we take a look at SAT and PSAT consideration, especially once the narrative starts to turn to national comparisons, I'd like to just remind people of volunteer bias. And that is that people, the idea that people who will volunteer to take a survey are inherently different than those who will not. And I bring this up because both the PSAT and SAT are required as state tests in Rhode Island. And so when we compare Rhode Island achievement on the PSAT and SAT, especially when we compare it to the national sample or to other states, we are usually talking about states where there's volunteer bias, where only students who perceive the SAT to be a beneficial or part of their college application or part of their future plans take part. It is not a 100% participation nationwide. Again, Rhode Island is actually one of the very few states that has the PSAT and SAT as state measures. So again, as we go through and enter into this season of taking a look at achievement data from last year, the other piece is regarding PSAT and SAT is that we're also having these students take them in almost a year early and that they can continue to take them. So our sophomores who take the PSAT during the school day will go on and have opportunities to take the PSAT again, as well as our juniors who take the SAT. They will continue to have opportunities to take the SAT over the course of the summer, as well as during the course of their senior year. And that's part of the data that is not part of the state's disclosure. So again, two pieces regarding state testing that are often bantered about and often come up in critiquing. But at the same time, we do need to make sure that we have all of the information regarding the type of test and who's taking that test and under what conditions they are taking that test. I just ask that folks please keep that in mind as we enter the release of state test scores. And so with that, I'm happy to turn this over to Mr. Seeger. Well, not, excuse me.
It appears that Mr. Seeger's discussion is part of school committee business. So I think that we should resolve and can just complete the
Yep.
superintendent's report, move
Yes.
on to community comments,
Yep.
and Mr. Seeger.
Thank you. So that begins, or excuse me, that ends my report.
Mr. Pedraza, can I just ask a couple of questions about the testing?
Certainly.
So my original question was, is this data about the 50%, the expectation of about 50% and then on the PSATs, SATs required versus optional? I was going to ask you if the state was putting out that information, but you answered that at the end. Are we prevented from putting out this information ourselves to our own community? And if not, how can we do that?
So we are not prevented from putting that out. What we would, and actually that will be part, I believe, of both Mr. Seeger and my tenure in terms of when we get into discussions about state testing results. Mr. Seeger will go into that and we'll have an opportunity in the discussion item to go through how we go about and present and use our state assessment data. And we just make sure that it's a piece about students learning. It's one piece of the puzzle, and that we then give the community, that we make sure that we continue to talk about our students' achievement data, both in terms of standardized tests, but other measures. And actually, as having teaching and learning as a standing agenda item is one way in which we believe we can do that, because we will have continued opportunity to demonstrate and show the community how we're helping and supporting all of our students achieve, regardless of whether it's through a state test or whether it's through the efforts afterwards.
Yeah, because I think that it would settle a lot of unease in the community about test scores.
Any further questions? Okay, we'll move on to,
I'd like to
We
make
have-
a motion to accept the superintendent report.
Second,
all in favor?
Aye.
That motion passes. Next on the agenda is school committee business. Do it. Right now, we'd like to open up community comments.
Mr. Beasley.
Hello, everyone. First comment was going to be about the monthly finance report, but since Mr. Kilpatrick's not here, I will hold that for the next time.
do you mind just identifying yourself for the
Oral
record?
Beasley. Thank you.
Thank you.
I might have missed in the superintendent's report, if he mentioned about the resignation of the instruction CTE person. Does that mean we don't have one now? We still have one? We don't know if we have one. I know, I can't answer the question. So, all right, so
Yeah. As I stated, we have certified individuals in front of our CTE students.
one question I've never asked before, I don't know if the people that teach CT courses, do they have to be certified teachers? Okay. So they're in the 10-step category. Thank you. So my new favorite report from the Rhode Island Department of Education is something called the Fiscal Accountability Report. I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at these yet. The one for FY23 just came out about 2 months ago. And it's quite interesting. It has a ton of data in there. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I would suggest that you glance it over. It's about 60 some pages in all. And I just have a couple of pages here. One is talking about CT expenditures in a district, in district and out of district. So it shows that South Kingstown has very little in district, in other words, but a massive amount out of district. We're even ahead of Central Falls now. The per pupil cost of money going out of district to other schools. See, I believe that's also must be charter too. I don't think it's. Can't believe it's just CT, but anyway. And the other one here I'm looking at is transportation per pupil expenditures, which shows South Kingstown as the third highest per pupil expenditure for transportation in the state, only behind Exeter, West Greenwich, Little Compton. So when Mr. Marin at the League of Women's Voters forum a week ago rebutted my statement saying that I thought the district should consider going into the bus business and cut our costs in half. He said, we're not going into the bus business. Last thing I want to talk about is level funding. You're about 10 weeks away from the first joint meeting with the town council talking about FY26 funding. And so the last 5 years, you've gotten $56 million every year from the town council, property tax transfer. That is not level funding. Level funding as written in the law is that whatever property tax transfer to your schools is this year divided by the average daily membership of your students whatever that number is, say it's 20,000. So next year, the minimum amount you can give to all your students is $20,000. That's level funding. But the problem with this district is this. Our enrollments decreased for 23 years. So not only that, but our budgets each year are calculated, the number of people that you're going to bring back to be in your school district in September is always calculated on the enrollment for the prior year. So you got two things going against you. You're calculating how many people should be in your district to support your students, teachers and staff on a number that's higher than the number that actually students show up in the fall. So I know the argument I've heard here. The argument is, well, if it's only 130, say it's 130 students, we have 13 grades, 12 plus kindergarten. So it's only 10 students per year, per grade. So that's nothing, right? So it's not even a teacher. It's a half a teacher, if that. But the problem lies in the fact that you've done that now year after year after year. And so I went back to the last time, the highest point that we had for employees to students ratio was 10 years ago. It was 6.75 students per employee. And today it's 5.75. So, and we've lost over that period of 10 years, more than 1,000 students. So when you've lost, and then when I looked at how many people worked in 10 years ago and how many work in today, and our enrollments dropped 30%, but the number of people here has only dropped 22%. That is why our compensation costs don't seem to be in line with other school districts. I just hope you'll consider that when you're calculating your budget this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley.
We'll move on to school committee business. Oh, okay. So moving on to school committee business, we have item A, it is a discussion. I'll turn that over to Mr. Seeger, Office of Teaching and Learning update.
Good evening, everybody. In keeping with past practice, I wanted to get back to my home station here at the podium. So thank you for indulging me. Just going back to Mr. Pedraza's report. Just wanted to thank Mr. Pedraza for setting the table for what I promise will be an appetizer as it relates to state assessment and all things accountability. As Mr. Pedraza had indicated, once we are in receipt of our actual state assessment data and those results, and we have had a chance to unpack that, with ourselves and with our teams, we do indeed plan to, come back to you and give that, pardon the expression, but the entree version of that report. So with that, next slide, please. While we wait for that slide, we can just again the purpose of tonight is really just that preview, that warm up, that just again, touching upon what processes and practices we look forward to employing once we receive that assessment data. Next slide, please. So as Mr. Pedraza had indicated, we do not have a definitive date at this time with respect to the release of our accountability data, our state assessment data. We, if passed as prologue, we would see that data sometime soon, as early as perhaps this week or perhaps into next month or beyond. But for the interim, if you are interested in going into that public-facing data portal, you can follow that link in blue at the bottom of the slide. So you can see previous iterations of release data from all of the myriad state assessments. Next slide, please. So you are probably wondering exactly what types of data we receive as part of the RICAS state assessment data package, if you will. So just, to set the table again, when we get that data, we are looking at the previous testing year's data for all students who participated in the assessment from grades 3 to 8 for RICAS in particular. The expectation is that all students enrolled engage in the RICAS test for both ELA and math, which happens annually in the spring. So with respect to the actual student level data, you can see in the slide deck here, there is a lengthy list of data that we get as an LEA, as a school district, and that we are able to drill down to a certain extent as it relates to the public facing piece. When it gets to individual student reports, that data is something that is confidential and something that LEAs have a chance to look at first, and then we do also share that data directly with families. In that last bullet there, I'll going to put that there just as a placeholder for a future slide, but we are able to break down performance by student group, by demographic groups, and again, see exactly how each student group compare. Next slide, please. So, yes,
Would you rather we wait till the end?
I'm happy to answer
Okay,
questions.
so I have a
at any time.
question on the page about,
Sure.
all students in grades 3 to 8 are tested annually. Can you just talk about or tell me about two things? Are parents still allowed to opt their kids out?
So I'll start with that question, and I'll say there is no formal opt-out process for state testing. Again, the expectation from the state down to our LEA is that all students will, participate meaningfully in the RICAS and all state assessments. We look at that as valuable summative data that helps to inform us around the efficacy of our programs. And so, that's how we examine the data. So to answer your question, no formal opt-out process.
Okay, so before I go on, I will confess that I used to be the testing coordinator in a different district. And like when students are absent on testing days, do we track them down and get them to take it on another? Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. And in my former life as a building level principal with grades, all of which were tested, that is something that is logistically planned out in advance with respect to defined testing days and then defined makeup windows. The state actually sets a defined primary testing window and then makeup window. So you can rest assured that here in South Kingstown, we will make sure that all students have the opportunity to engage in that assessment. And there are levers in place for students to be able to, engage in that makeup process. And then should there be a medical reason or something of that magnitude that prevents a child from participating, there is a formal state process to help to capture that and give like an opt-out, I guess I would call it, for the district.
So I asked the question because I was having a nightmare. Because as the testing coordinator in a different district, I was in charge of tracking those kids down. So I just wanted to see if somebody else had been saddled with that. Thank you.
Yes. All right, and back to the slide here, and thank you for those questions. So this so happens to be one of my favorite slides here, and I think it really simplifies for, hopefully for you and for audience members, the types of frameworks that we often see with respect to our state assessment results. And I will say, kind of anecdotally speaking here, and perhaps it's a generalization, but I know when I go to different newspapers of record or news sources of record, oftentimes we see the left side of this slide deck, which is state assessment data posed as comparison data. And oftentimes it is framed as grade level performance year to year. So for example, with this year's publication, you might see something, a headline or tagline or lead that indicates, grade 5 scores up or down from last year's grade 5 scores. And so the apple and the orange is quite, in your face there to call out that we're not talking about the same kids or the same cohorts. We are quite literally comparing, the apples to oranges when we look at the by grade level year to year comparison. And I know Mr. Pedraza and I in our former lives and what we look forward to being a part of as it relates to the South Kingstown team is really towards the right-hand side, looking at our data as apples to apples wherever possible. So, what do I mean by that for those of you, playing along at home here? We're looking at the data by cohort and by, looking longitudinally at how students have grown over the course of time. So that is, it's a personal preference and, again, looking for the growth data in, part of the state assessment data. Next slide, please. So we wanted to give the school committee and members of the school community at large an example of what this would look like in terms of a way we would organize this data at the LEA district level and then certainly at the school level. So this is an example of that first example of grade 7 math year to year. This is actual South Kingstown data captured here in the table. And I won't walk you through each of these pieces here, but you can see, as indicated by the various fruits, there are, again, we're not talking about the same kids when we talk about the 183 students that took RICAS grade 7 math in 2021 versus the 192 in 3. So again, just keep that in mind when you do read those headlines and those leads, good, bad, or otherwise. And then just something I wanted to call attention to when you look at the growth and performance columns, those the keys for that, if you will, go back to a previous slide, that those growth numbers, those 3 numbers, that falls out from top to bottom, low growth, typical growth, and high growth, the percentages of those students who were in each of those buckets, if you will. And with performance, those are 4 levels. That's your not meeting through exceeds. That's your core, and that also goes top to bottom. Next slide, please. And true to form here, we have a slide that captures our apples to apples, our mostly the same cohort, and that, would exclude any student who withdrew from the district or new enrollments in the district, or students who had previously not taken the test for whatever reason, then taking it in a later year. So you can see, again, looking at this longitudinally, you can track some of those figures here with, this is our current 8th grade class. So how they fared in, the year back in person following COVID, and meeting and exceeding expectations up through, where that growth had led them in their scaled scores, their average growth percentile, as well as their overall number meeting and exceeding expectations. So again, when we look for that trend data, we're trying to look at that longitudinal cohort-based data. And I will pause there for any questions that you might have.
I don't necessarily have a question. It's more of a clarification when people are calling out. I understand what you're saying, that we want to look at our year-to-year cohorts and how they are growing, because that's what we want for our students. But when folks call out the not following the student, but rather the year-to-year, it's more calling out the curriculum and or method of teaching at those grade levels. So while I appreciate you bringing this information and so that we can follow our students to ensure that they are growing and learning and developing, we also want to make sure that our teachers are also growing, learning, and developing in their method of distributing education. So there is the 2 distinctly good ways of looking at it, but if we're focused on our student achievement, we would want to look at it, as you said, apples to apples. But to call to maybe our curriculum at different grade levels, we might want to look at it through the other lens as well.
Certainly, I appreciate that point. And, what I would say, just to your point, is, when we look at these scores, we do look at them as it is one snapshot, it's one assessment, it's one moment in time. It is one source of data of many that we can look at to better inform us about the efficacy of our programs, down to, specific grade levels, or, again, being careful in talking about, causation and correlation as well, and what might be contributing, and, where we as a learning system can, have some introspection around, what materials are we using? What instructional practices are we employing? And so on. So, I certainly look forward to supporting, the data analysis piece, and then again, having conversations related to, what do we see as the correlating pieces here, or the causal pieces? So I appreciate that. Right, next slide, please. And just one other way that we do examine our state assessment data is, looking at our student groups in comparison to our statewide averages. So this slide simply shows you how, again, locally, how we fared with our assessment data versus the statewide assessments. And what I'd say is, if you focus your attention to the right-hand sides and looking at those, the green hued tables in particular, you can see areas where, if you're looking at the difference between the average growth percentile across the state with respect to student groups, and then what you're looking at on the right, you can see areas where, we have cause to certainly pause and acknowledge that, and in many instances, celebrate where we are at as a district with respect to our comparison versus, again, that statewide average. So this is another lens that you'll see applied to state assessment data, both locally and across the state and even nationally. And next slide, please.
Mr. Seeger, I would just also say that that analysis by student group is really, I think, in terms of the type of dive that the equity audit will be getting into. Because, this is actually a local analysis where in terms of just for our ease of comparison that we've put a locally, kind of created color score over each one of them to compare to the state. But then we also have in terms of achievement gaps, in terms of analyzing those groups. And so while it's wonderful in many cases to say, hey, this is how we're comparing to the state. Okay, but how are we comparing to ourselves within the district? And this is the type of work and the deeper dive that, that I know the district is committed to in terms of the equity audit, but also the type of work that we inherently do to make sure that we're serving all students. So
I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. So on the left is statewide average, right? It's not that, and then on the right is ours. So when we look at white students, we're about 10 points higher than the state average. When we look at students who they identify as 2 or more races, we're at the average. So our achievement gap is actually greater than the state's average achievement gap in that area. Okay.
You're reading that correctly.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice. Thank you.
And again, I earlier in the presentation, I had alluded to that performance comparison by demographic and by student group. So again, this is a snapshot of the work that we will continue to engage in, both via the equity audit process, along with our own internal processes that we look at this data, and again look at that through the lens of where do we see opportunities for continued growth, and where do we see opportunities for, again, focusing our attention. Right. So in the final slide here, I just wanted to talk about one change that we are anticipating with respect to our student assessment data. That is a departure from prior years of RICAS testing. So up through this year, we have been provided with a variety of released items for both ELA and math. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with a released item, that is, quite literally, they provide you with the exact test question that students were expected to answer as part of both their ELA and math tests, along with the robust, detailed, down to the individual student level performance on that particular question. And so in my former life, and also what had happened per my understanding, as part of the work around state assessment data here locally, looking at those assessments and then crosswalking that with, what opportunities do our students have and our teachers have in the existing curricula to engage in teaching and learning related to the types of questions that are designed to elicit understanding or skill level related to standards. So these are actual test questions from 22, 23 and 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 8th grade for math. And it just so happens these were some questions that locally gave our kids kind of a hard time, versus the statewide average. And you can see, again, this is just one question, but there is a certain level of rigor related to, the expectations of what students should know and be able to do at these respective grade levels. So in the absence of having the released items, we will certainly continue to drill down specific questions based on what is published in terms of the actual Common Core state standard being identified. But in terms of having, being positioned and having the actual question and the data around that, we are not expecting that to be part of the release this year. But we remain committed to engaging in the deepest dive possible that we are able to, given what is provided. And with that, I will pause and ask any questions that we did not have a chance to touch upon.
Now it is time for Are You Smarter Than a Third Grader? Are you smarter than a fifth grader?
We
Are you
had
smarter
talked
than an eighth
about maybe doing some cold calling, but we but it is interesting if you wanted to go through and see.
Especially if you own several degrees in math. So my question is, if our third graders are expected to do this type of problem, why am I still teaching it in college? And if our eighth graders are expected to know what a rotation and a reflection is, why don't they know in college? That's
Well, and we are hopeful, with we are hopeful that with our, our high quality curriculum materials and with our, implementation with integrity over the course of time, that we are, really providing students with learning opportunities, with deep learning opportunities related to the standards that position them to be able to really show off what they know and what they're able to do at all grade levels in a meaningful way, in a way that, again, honors the work that's being done in the classrooms daily. So with that, that was my best college try at answering the question. But with that, I'd entertain any other questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Seeger.
Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. Okay. Next item on the agenda, item B, discussion and action on a fundraiser. I believe that's why Mr. Lynch is here. Come on up.
Me? So, my field hockey coach put a fundraising form for you tonight. She wants to raise money for equipment, extra equipment, and supplemental uniforms that they're looking for. So they're going to do a similar fundraiser that we've done with girls soccer, boys soccer, football. So I'm trying to be pretty consistent with what we're doing fundraiser wise. We're going through, as I've spoken before, Sean O'Neill, who is the official, if you will, fundraiser of the Interscholastic League. So that's what that's what they would like to do if you would be so kind as to.
I'll make a motion to approve the fundraiser for the SK field hockey team as submitted.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
That motion passes.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is C, discussion on school building project update. Okay.
So we've had a couple meetings over the past couple weeks around the abutters of the South Kingston High School property, because we will be starting our drilling for the geothermal test well. That was supposed to kick off this week. But I'll start with the meetings were great. We had really good turnout from the folks in our community, a lot of support from the folks that live around the school. We basically went through a whole presentation around how the drilling, it will stay within all noise ordinances. It's not going to be disruptive to our school day, our students. The community members were wonderful, asked great questions, were really involved, and actually quite excited for this particular piece. We had a lot of advocates come and kind of, say if the test passes and we have this capability, having a voice to support moving forward if we can. So those meetings were wonderful. As far as the actual test well drilling process, it has yet to start. It was slotted to start this week. There seems to be a supply issue with the safety fencing. Gilbane is pushing quite hard on the team that is going to be doing that install and doing the testing. And hopefully that will commence in the next couple of days. I will forward along any project updates that I get from there. Our next school building committee meeting is set for October 16th at 6 p.m. The location is still to be determined as we are trying to find a room that has video streaming capabilities at our disposal. Myself and Luke Murray are kind of hashing out different options. The other piece that I'm going to be looking for, and I'm actually going to put a formal request out to our admin team and to our school committee leadership, is we need a formal decision to be made around the administration building so that we can make some decisions around our athletic field and restrooms and things of that nature. I won't get into the details right now, but I would like to have that on the next meeting agenda so that we can have an official decision made. So we can move forward.
Ask you a question about the geothermal testing.
Sure.
So I noticed on the bids over 10,350, there was the roughly 98,000 for the testing. Is that the final cost came now? We approved 125. So did it come under that? Yeah, that's great news.
Yeah. Anybody else have any other questions around that? We will be having another community forum that we are planning in November. And we will be, sharing as much information as possible out to the community and to the school district and the town offices to make sure we get as much participation as possible about the full project itself, not just the geothermal testing. So we will have a full, robust forum planned in November, and I will bring back more details around that after our meeting on the 16th.
Thank you, Kate. Moving on to item B, which is a discussion and action on policy 6105. I will pass that over to Mr. Recibo from the Boyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I wasn't able to attend the last school committee meeting where these are up for first read, but I did review the recording, and it sounded like there weren't any real substantial edits to this particular policy, 6105 for school visitation and volunteer identification. I did hear the comments about having a potentially separate volunteer policy around training and what that entails and what that looks like. And I am in agreement that it should be a separate policy. So I brought this one back up on the agenda as it was on the last one, just cleaned it up and put the date for tonight. Assuming we'll approve it, we can always change that date if we don't. But yeah, there are no substantial changes from the first read on this 6105.
I'd like to make a motion to approve policy 6105 school visitation as presented.
Second,
Any further discussion? Ms. Boyd?
I just wanted to remind or put out that there was a duplicate policy, 1250 related to school visitation, that should this one be approved, that in a future school committee meeting, we should have an agenda item to remove 1250 and have this one stand alone.
I thought it was struck in last meeting.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, just to catch you up or catch up the community, it was 1250 was struck, but it was actually duplication. 6105 and 1250 are exactly the same right now. So 6105 is in place as the previous iteration. This is a revision to that policy. So it is replacing the old 6105, and by virtue of the fact that the 1250 is exactly the same, as we struck that one.
Okay, Everyone, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That motion passes. Next item is policy 8325. Bus
Thank-
discipline.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the 8325, again, I did hear just a couple comments about the verbiage in the, I believe it's in the guidelines section on page 3. There were some comments, I think Ms. Vedder was asking if we could have it say the administrator's designee instead of the staff, which is more generic. I think it's both kind of amount to be about the same, but administrator's designee does still put the ownership of that distribution of punishment in the hands of the administrator still. So I went ahead and made that change. That is the only substantial change other than changing the date to today's date.
I'd like to make a motion to approve policy 8325 bus discipline as presented.
Second.
Any questions? Further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Paula, before we make a motion to adjourn, I'd like to request an agenda item or some sort of decision discussion for either a next meeting or in between meetings about the location of our school committee meetings. I find this location less than ideal. The setup is very difficult on the stage here with the TV. The seating is not ideal for our public. I'm not sure why we moved from the high school, but that's where we've had our meetings for certainly well over 15 years that I've been involved in this, in the school committee. And either we have a discussion about why it's here or moving it back to the high school for multiple reasons. But if we could do that, that'd be great. And after saying that, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Noted.
Yep.
Second? Okay,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes at 8:02.